you ready? Go ahead, start. We're going. Okay, so everybody good for lunch? Getting up pizza, food? Yeah. Always good. All good? Okay, so we're going to kick off this afternoon here with Matt. So he's going to do a presentation on active defense, threat actors, stuff like that. So what do you think of the first two this morning? So, One Identity and MTSI, they have people out there go out there and steal their pens and pads and stuff that they had out there. So they don't want to carry home, is what I was told. So go out there and steal their stuff. So Matt's going to give a presentation, do a little live demo, right?
Yep.
So and Daryl's going to come up. And while in between them setting up for their presentation, we're going to give off the Raspberry Pi, right? And then after the, right before the cake cutting, or we're going to do that, no, we're going to, so after the second, after Daryl goes, we're going to, 3 o'clock is the cake, and then right now we're still not sure on our last presenter. We were told last night he was going to be here, but if for some reason he doesn't show, Matt has kindly prepared a second presentation for us. So we will have a fifth presentation guaranteed by. So, and so with that, we want to make sure we get the fifth one in so that we can give you the CPE, CEUs, whatever you need for your certs. So make sure you come see us up front afterwards so you can get your certs, right?
They're checked in now.
Yep, so and if you haven't checked in with Sarah, please do so that everybody that showed up and did check in, and then get you in for the CPEs and all that kind of stuff. So make sure you're checking in. All right, so Matt, it's all yours, and then we'll do the round one.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great conference. I know I am. Definitely getting lots of good information here. So my topic today is active defense, helping threat actors hack themselves. If you're not following me on Twitter already, at C3RKAH, be sure to follow me. And also the slide deck. Later today, I will have this deck up. You can also see the previous versions at slideshare.net/circa. And so with that, allow me to introduce myself real quick. It's Matt Scheer is my name. And system security engineer working in the financial services industry. I'm also chair for the SIMPA Security SIG. It's a monthly InfoSec meetup, very much like this group, but we meet in Cincinnati on the third Thursday of each month. So it's 1 week after OISF. For you Daytonians, it's actually the northern part of Cincinnati, right off of 75 and 275 interchange, within a stone's throw there, and not 10 minutes away from Micro Center, which is sort of both a blessing and a curse, right? I've spoken at conferences all over the Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky tri-state. I've got some IT certifications, currently working through CCNA Cyber Ops. And so, quickly, yes, I do have a day job. However, the opinions expressed are solely my own and do not express the views or opinions of my employer. There's a disclaimer which looks absolutely nothing like the OISF one. It wasn't ripped off from there. No, not at all. But yeah, so if you do this stuff, some of it's going to be at your own risk. Now, I try to cover what may or may not get you reported for hosting malicious content. But by and large, these are sort of passive things. For those of you who might be familiar with John Strand's work at Black Hills Information Security, he talks about a delineation point between poison versus venom. Poison being something that's taken from you and ingested, venom being something that is purposely injected. And so we try to stay very much on the poison side and avoid straying into venom. So quickly, let's talk about what active defense is. And of course, like all good topics, it's on Wikipedia. And so active defense can refer to defense strategy in the military or cybersecurity arena. The Department of Defense defines active defense as the employment of limited offensive action and counterattacks to deny a contested area or position to the enemy. In the cybersecurity arena, active defense may mean asymmetric defenses, namely defenses that increase costs to cyber adversaries while reducing costs to cyber defenders. And certainly as we work through some of the defense techniques, you'll see that at play today. So why should we talk about active defense? So regardless of which end of the spectrum you fall on for hacking back legalization, the point is it's illegal today, whether you're for it or against it. And so active defense is really the next level beyond honeypots, honey files, and honey nets. And those were talked about a little bit today. This goes a little bit further than those do. Our objectives are going to be to, one, first and foremost, shield, protect legitimate users at all times. And we want to be very diligent about protecting innocent site visitors. Next, we want to frustrate malicious threat actors attempting to steal and exfiltrate data through unauthorized access, preferably by unwittingly hacking themselves. And finally, see objective number 1. Can't stress it enough. We're going to talk about how we protect innocent people from ever actually stumbling across this active defense content. So it's only the malicious threat actors that will find this stuff. So our presentation focus is going to be on defense for a website, a public-facing website. What we're going to do is we're going to bait and set traps for script kiddies and other cyber criminals. And so some inspirations for this, where some of this stuff comes from. Aikido is something like many years and many pounds ago, I studied martial arts quite a bit. And Aikido is one of the forms that I studied a little bit. And even though I don't practice anymore, those philosophies have stuck with me. And so Aikido is using an opponent's energy or force against them. For those of you who are familiar with Steven Seagal, that's primarily his form that he uses as a martial artist. Also, I'm not sure how many original ideas in life my dad had, but he had a great one for combating junk mail. So what he would do is when he would receive junk mail with offers and so on and so forth that would have a prepaid return envelope, what he would do is he would take out the parts that were attributable to his name and address and basically anything would identify him. He would take that out and basically mail them back the rest of their advertisement. And his theory was that if they have to pay postage both ways, they're going to start sending less junk mail because all of a sudden it's going to stop paying off for them. So that was one of his strategies that I sort of looked at and thought, that's kind of clever. I like that one. And then finally, well, not finally, but nature, animal defenses, certainly you saw in the title slide. There's a reason we don't mess around with skunks and porcupines, right? We don't want to pay the price that it is to mess with those type of animals. And so I've always been fascinated with animals, even as a kid, and I'm still enamored with them. So certainly some inspiration drawn there. And finally, well, and also nostalgia. So I'm a very nostalgic person by nature, and what's great about these is that everything old is new again. So I've taken things I've seen, sometimes going back so many years, I can't even source them anymore as to where I came up with them. I just remember what they were, but I don't remember, I can't attribute it to exactly who came up with it. We're talking things that would show up in an auto-exec bat file back before there was really Windows in high use in the MS-DOS days, as one example. And then finally, I'm a security-minded person, yet a prankster at heart. So I like messing with coworkers, friends, and so forth. And I know some of you in the audience, and I know that describes you as well. And also a vigilante nature. There's something in me that just really doesn't mind seeing the bad guys get what they deserve, get what's coming to them. So some conventions used. I kind of talked about this in the disclaimer a little bit. So I've come up with a hot water index. So the escalating temperatures sort of indicate the chances that you might get reported for hosting malicious content. So some of these things are so benign that they're going to register very low. Some of them, yeah, there could be somebody that could complain about them. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and start off by talking legitimate users. Again, this is our most important objective. So there's some things we can do here. We can create a robots text file. We can also use a sitemap XML file, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what these, what comprises of these files, what their purpose is. It's very important that we don't link to any active defense content on our websites or elsewhere. You might want to use a link or a hyperlink checker just to verify that I know this is my active defense content. I want to make sure that there's nothing that's going to publicly find it and index it. Search engines will pick it up, or that there's links to it from any place else, even in our own websites. And then also we want to disable directory indexing on legitimate content. We'll talk a little bit more about our active defense content when we get there, but we also want to protect yourself potentially by using authorized user-only messages. And what I want to start off talking about first is the robots text file, which is literally on the root of any website. You'll have a robots.txt file. And so the first line in this actually defines where the sitemap is. So that tells visiting web pages, hey, here's the sitemap where all our legitimate content is. Really the purpose of the robots text file, though, is to basically tell search crawlers, legitimate ones, and sort of caching systems or archival systems. It basically says, don't ever archive this material that lives here. And so user agent string with the asterisk basically says, regardless of what web browser it is, you want to follow these rules. You could actually specify specific user agents. So you could, for example, have different rules for Firefox versus Chrome versus any other web browser. The asterisk encompasses everything. And so what you see here are a bunch of disallows in a number of directories. And what that is used for is that is what tells the crawlers, stay out of these areas. These are the, this is your proverbial keep out sign that tells people don't go into this content. The stuff in here isn't anything that we want publicly accessible. And of course, I've put some comment code in here on company confidential information and sort of describe what some of these things might be. And again, at the very top line there, the reference is where you can actually find the reference model for how to build out your own robots text file. So again, this is our keep out sign. Finally, the sitemap XML file is another file type. And if you remember, our first line is linking to where this file was. You can find the reference on sitemaps.org/protocol.html. And that'll give you the syntax that you want to use for this. And in the example here, there's basically some metacode that, it's just kind of the usual, here's where the schema is and what it was built on, so on and so forth. The important thing is the location field here at the bottom. And what this does is this is what says, here's where the legitimate content is. Here's where you should focus. I just have one location, which is the root folder. You could obviously set more than one location to cover different areas of your website, but this is sort of similar to if you ever go to a lake and they have a boating area, but they have a roped off swimming area with buoys that sort of mark this is the safe swim zone. This is sort of the internet equivalent of the safe swim zone. And so what we're saying is, hey, all legitimate content is inside the root folder. It doesn't really venture out of there. If we had subfolders and so forth, we would actually want to define those here. So directory indexing. So what we want to do is a matter of good web security. For any of your real web content, you really want to disable directory indexing on all of it. What that does is if somebody visits a portion of your website and it doesn't have a file that's referenced in the index definitions to serve up a default web page, it'll actually spill out and show what the contents of that folder are. So people could actually use that to find things they maybe shouldn't stumble across, understand what the file types are, exfiltrate data, those sort of things. And it's a bad practice to have directory indexing turned on where people can see the folder contents. For all your real content, again, disable that. The exception here, though, I would suggest is that we go ahead and leave directory indexing turned on for our active defense content, just to make sure that the people that are doing things outside what a normal user would use for a web browser, for example, they're going to find the content that are in our active defense stuff. And as we alluded to earlier, we want to have some juicy enough targets that they're going to go after these things. And so authorized user only message, you can create a readme.txt or readme.html file. You can put both of them in there. Basically, this is just kind of a warning message. It doesn't say, hey, welcome, come and, navigate our stuff and take a look around, see if there's anything you like. This basically says, hey, if you're not authorized to be in here, you shouldn't be in here. Now, would this hold up legally? I don't know. Probably not, but it can't hurt. Certainly if you can prove that somebody downloaded this and they ignored it, it's just maybe something that plays in your favor, potentially. At the very least, it can't hurt. So the first act of defense I want to talk about is the round trip round kick, as I call it. And the idea here is that we're going to create a bunch of unused DNS subdomain host records that point back to the loopback address of 127.0.0.1. And really, the idea behind this, Jared talked about the find subdomains and sort of as places you can look to exploit and search for vulnerabilities. The idea behind this is you're pointing back to the loopback. The harder the attackers think they're hitting you, the harder they're actually just hitting themselves. And so I've got some ideas and some things you can use here, and things like API, app, blog, whatever your domain is, .com, cloud, email, mail, FTP, all sorts of things that threat actors would look to potentially exploit. OWA for Outlook Web Access for people that are sort of probing, looking for those organization webmail folders, and so on. And then VPN. We talked a lot about VPN, brute forcing and so on. That's definitely something you could consider. Auto-discover for people that are looking to try to understand what your Microsoft Exchange environment might look like if you have one. WordPress, so on. And so really, if somebody's attacking these subdomains, they're really just going back to their own server instead of hitting anything that you have. Obviously, you can't use anything that you're legitimately using here as an act of defense pointing back to the loopback. But if we can just create enough sort of bogus entries in your DNS zone, then we could definitely keep threat actors busy. And also, if they've compromised something else, maybe sort of throw signs to those administrators if they're watching. Good chance they're not if they were compromised in the first place, but they might finally see, hey, why do we have all this traffic coming to our network if they're, egress detection is lacking, their ingress detection might be a little better. They might actually discover, oh my gosh, we've been owned. Maybe we should do something about that. This next defense is, I call it stomach viver gross out, and I give it a little bit higher potential on the hot water meter there for getting reported. The idea here is that we stage an unreferenced folder with a fake door badge ID template, and actually that was mentioned earlier during the social engineering talk at the beginning of the conference. The important thing is when you do that, it should look like maybe it could be official, but it shouldn't look exactly like your real one, because obviously you don't want to give people an easy way to replicate your door access badges or entry badges looking too close to legitimate ones. And then we want to place some gross out pictures of choice disguised as staff photo headshots. Now, when I first gave this talk the first time, it was in front of my boss. I didn't want to talk to HR. I've got friends that have really warped senses of humor, so they'll put things like Goatsy and Meat Spin and Tub Girl and stuff like that. I couldn't really get away with that, so I actually found a lot of pictures of people vomiting. I personally have a strong stomach. I can take about anything, but not everybody can. And particularly if you have a threat actor, they're trying to exploit your site, maybe they don't have a strong stomach and sort of get disgusted, maybe lose their lunch. That'd be all right with me. So I give an example here, maybe something you might construct just to look like it would be a template that you would use to create access badges. And I'm going to spare people of a gross photo and just rickroll you instead here. And you can see just kind of a directory here, and I kind of make it look like it might be a real person's headshot, just for something for people to stumble across. They think they've got something really good to do impersonation attacks. Turns out they don't. This one I call Reflector Madness. This is a pretty low chance of getting reported. But the idea here is that what we want to do is sort of give the threat actors a false sense of confidence. We want them to be able to defeat something and feel really good about themselves, to realize that in the end they've been had. So we'll create an easy to crack password protected folder, but what's waiting inside won't be something they expect. And so here is a password protected folder using credentials to basically protect it, and it's going to prompt them when they go to this website /protected. They'll get a prompt for a username and password. Anybody want to try to take a guess at cracking this? What the username and password would be? It's very simple to crack. Admin and anybody, password for the password. Absolutely correct. And what you're going to find most likely is going to be this, which is a connection refused message. But what they might actually find is something like this, which would actually be their own web server running on their own local system. At the very least, this should really perplex the attackers. Why am I seeing my own stuff? It might even spook them a little bit, thinking, oh my gosh, how in the world am I seeing my own server? What I kind of hope is that maybe it's something old that they've kind of forgotten about, and it'd be even better if they've got fields that they're trying to, sort of do cross-site scripting against and stuff like that. At this point, they're literally trying to hack their own web server. Meanwhile, you're sitting harmless, with no real threat or impact to you. And the reason for this is what's inside the source code here. And so what this is it's just a seamless iframe that is actually pointing back to the loopback address of, let's see if I can find it here on the slide. Yeah, right here. So basically, it's just pointing back to the loopback address. So if they're running a web server on the box they're trying to attack you from, that's exactly what they're going to see by cracking this, basically username and password protected folder. So a little bit of sleight of hand, a little bit of misdirection, fun times. Maybe not for the bad guys, but we don't care about them anyway. So this one I call going nowhere fast. And so WordPress is by far the most deployed CMS in the world, powering countless websites. And even Jared talked about having a WordPress site, and it's constantly being attacked. The reason it's constantly being attacked is because everybody's out there trying to launch attacks against WordPress sites indiscriminately, because oftentimes they're easy to breach. I'm not fully of the opinion that you can't have a semi-secure WordPress site. It's just that many places that have them don't. And there are several reasons for it. One of the most notable is that they simply don't keep up with the patches and so forth. WordPress has kind of a bad history of being exploitable. A lot of people don't trust it. Reason for that is because there's that history there. I think in more recent versions they've gotten a lot better, but the reason they're still getting popped all the time is people don't keep them up to date. If you're not running the latest version of WordPress, you're probably vulnerable to something. At least there's a very good chance of it. Also, sometimes sometimes a lot of people end up with themes. They don't delete out unused themes. There might be a reason to keep around your theme. That maybe the theme you're using, child theme, and the default theme, if you had to revert back to troubleshoot a WordPress site, those things can come in handy. But sometimes people will just experiment with all kinds of themes. They'll never deactivate them. They'll just leave them in the system. But really the number one thing are the plugins. The plugins for WordPress are community developed. So a lot of times you get what you pay for with particularly novice coders who are developing WordPress plugins. And let's just throw an arbitrary number out there. Let's say 20% of WordPress plugins have vulnerabilities. Well, if you have 10 plugins installed in your WordPress deployment, chances are 2 of them are vulnerable. What if you have 20? Now all of a sudden you have 4 plugins, any of which could be exploited and lead to a compromise of your site. And really it escalates from there. I've unfortunately seen a lot of times where a lot of quote-unquote WordPress developers are really just sort of plugin jockeys, and rather than actually knowing how to code something, they just throw a whole lot of plugins into it to make it look cool and do cool stuff. The problem is that they're making themselves vulnerable. Their exposure footprint goes up dramatically the more plugins they add. And also, the same thing holds true, right? People don't keep their plugins up to date. Vulnerabilities are discovered. They patch it, but if they don't actually patch their WordPress deployment with the latest, they're vulnerable. So anyway, what this leads to is I have a live WordPress login, wp-login.php file. And again, this is going to prompt for a username and password. Anybody want to take a guess at cracking this one? Username, password, anyone? WordPress. WP admin. These are all good guesses. However, it's not actually going to work. And the reason why is the web page you just saw, it's a completely fabricated WordPress login page. There's absolutely no real username or password that'll work for those. So the goal is to have brute force attackers really just spin their wheels trying to crack a WordPress login page and never actually be able to accomplish it, because it doesn't matter what combination they use, it's never going to work. So they're going to spin their wheels, waste their time, energy, and resources. Also, we talked a lot about, sort of password spraying and things like that. Well, this is a good way to collect usernames and passwords, by the way, if you're logging this, of what the threat actors are trying to use against you. So if you're looking to form your own password list, maybe let the bad guys help you out. And I know I personally have a lot of fun because I like looking at log files and seeing, particularly the Russian Federation, sort of relentlessly keeps trying to brute force attack the page, and they don't ever actually get anywhere. But keep trying, guys. You maybe almost had it that last time. Maybe not. But shh, it's our secret, right? All right, so this is further sold also by planning the appropriate folder structure and default files that give away a site as being a WordPress site. So, for example, there is a readme.html file that's a real WordPress readme.html file. There's a license.txt file. There's a wp-admin folder. There's a wp-content folder. So these things that sort of make a site really look like a WordPress site, they're in there just to further sell it. So there's a lot to sort of unpack with this act of defense that I call pie to the face. Give it a sort of medium high chance for possibly being reported for malicious content. So there's a lot to unpack here. Let me just kind of go through it. So what we want to do is we're going to basically use disinformation to waste the attacker's time, potentially get them banned from larger service providers. We're going to burn CPU cycles and potentially drain their batteries. And what we're doing with this is we're starting by using enterprising cyber criminals' own cryptojacking techniques against them. For those who don't know, cryptojacking, a lot of websites, and we're seeing it now with just the most unusual places. In a lot of instances, threat actors have given up on ransomware in favor of these cryptojacking techniques, which is if they can compromise a popular website and put in JavaScript code to do crypto mining for them, a site that gets enough visitors, they can actually mine cryptocurrency. And it's been a growing problem. Interestingly, when I first started toying with this in December, there had been just a little blurb about this maybe in November of last year. And it really gave me the idea that I wanted to try to figure out a way to sort of throw this back in the bad guys. And so the setup for this is we're going to have a webmaster folder that's going to contain a bookmarks.html file. Now, if I'm a threat actor and I can understand what a webmaster is using, that's a treasure trove of information. That's a target-rich target for me to go after. And what we're going to do to make sure they try to spend some time there is we're going to stage non-existent login account links for popular sites and services that an attacker might waste time trying to brute force, very similar to the attempt to have a fake login page. Similar idea. Hopefully, so just to kind of digress here a little bit, the threat actors, if I block them, for example, from attacking my site, no big deal. There's countless other targets they'll go after. It's actually far better, in my opinion, if they spend a whole lot of time trying to basically attack and defeat nothing, than if they move on to the next target. But also, if I ban you, again, they'll just move on. There's endless targets they can go after next. If Microsoft or Google ban you, for example, you might have bigger problems than if I ban you, because the sort of net is a much wider one as you go out to the bigger internet with some of the big players out there. Oh, and by the way, behind the scenes, we're computationally counting pi hundreds of thousands of times. And with that, we wash, rinse, and repeat. And so just to show you what the bookmarks.html file looks like, here we've got login username for Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft Live ID, Twitter, Yahoo. Anybody want to know why I would pick those targets? or basically stage that as something that an attacker might want to go after? I don't see any hands here, but I'm sorry?
Your social media stuff.
Yeah, indeed, social media stuff, but also these are big players for single sign-on, right? There are a lot of places that you can log into with a Google account or a Facebook account, and so on. Even to a lesser extent, LinkedIn, Twitter. So these are services that you use for single sign-on. If I can compromise your Google account, I can log into a lot of different sites and services as you, by virtue of having that one account through single sign-on, because a lot of services out there support it. So some interesting notes about this. The idea is that I tried to have as many of these as possible pre-populate a username, so they would spend time trying to brute force the password. And by the way, the username webmaster@cybernatty.com doesn't exist on any of these services, at least not one that I've ever created, and I can't imagine anybody else would try to create those either. So some interesting things I noticed. Facebook works exactly like I want to. It pre-populates the username. They can try putting in the password. Google, I actually couldn't get to sort of pre-populate a username. They kind of use a staged login process that didn't seem to support it. I'm not saying there's not a way to do it. I just couldn't find one in the 5 to 10 minutes I spent trying to reverse engineer it. LinkedIn has an odd effect where it only takes you to the login page if you're already logged in. And it's really weird because it shows you logged in the upper right-hand corner, and then it's presenting you with a username and password prompt in the middle of the screen. So very weird. I actually purposely changed Microsoft Live ID. The actual field name would be, I believe, username. I changed it to email because I'd noticed something. So we talked about, well, Jared, I believe, talked about, people who use their company email accounts other places. Well, guess what? With Microsoft Live, it'll actually tell you if a username is valid or not. Not that the username or password is invalid, that the actual username is. So I could actually use this, if I'm an enterprising red teamer, to basically try to figure out if somebody's registered their company email to Microsoft Live, and it'll actually spit back and tell me, if I know I've got a valid username, now all I have to do is crack their password. That's definitely something that, it's bad security practice. Microsoft goes back to the 1970s. Unfortunately, so does that process of telling people your username or password is invalid. What's interesting is it does use this information. When you would actually go to this URL, it would actually pop up and let you register it, and it did carry that name forward. Twitter worked exactly like I wanted it to, pre-populating all the information. Yahoo as well worked exactly like I wanted, where it would basically pre-populate that information. By the way, I've set all of these links so that they open up in new tabs, new windows. The reason for that is this is not persistent. So once somebody closes this page, the active defense that you'll see goes away. So it's very simple to basically stop. And the other reason you pick good targets is so that they will spend time leaving this open as long as possible. And the reason for that, we'll talk a little bit about sort of what's inside the file here, but the at the upper right there in the header is a meta refresh. So what that does is it refreshes the page every 3.14 seconds. I had to put that in. I'll talk about that here in just a moment. But that's at the very top of it. At the very bottom, you see it's actually calling two JavaScript files. They actually are identical files. They do the exact same thing. And what they're doing here is basically computing pi over 314,000 times each. So we're computing pi over 628,000 times. And I could actually increment this number, and what that does for me is by incrementing that number, it'll take longer, and the impact lasts a lot longer. But there was a problem with it when I was testing it. So most browsers would pop up and say, hey, this page is taking an extremely long time to load. Do you want to stop the page from running? Do you want to close the page? Well, first of all, it tips off a bad guy. Like, why would a bookmarks HTML file take a long time to load? It doesn't make a lot of sense. And they might start looking at it. So to get around that, that's why I started refreshing the page every 3.14 seconds. So what that does is it just momentarily stops the computing of pi all those hundreds of thousands of times and kicks it right back up again. There's also this weird sort of psychological effect when you see a decimal point. It doesn't really jump out at you as, hey, this is something that is, suspect. If you just see the number 3, that might draw a little more attention. If you see a decimal point, It just sort of bleeds in with the other meta information. So the CPU attacks to attackers on a low-powered system, or say a dual-core VM, this will spike the CPU up to 100% load pretty easily. Even on a moderately powered desktop system, it'll maybe spike the CPU up to 50%. And if they're already running a heavy CPU load, like something web pen testing platform like Burp that's based on Java, it's nothing for that to just eat away the CPU cycles. And so what this will do is this, if they're already running a heavy 50% load, this is going to maximize their CPU. It's really going to drag their system down. It's going to be hard for them to make a lot of progress because their system performance is really going to suffer. And then also, if they're doing this on a mobile device, like a laptop that's running on battery power, this heavy CPU load is going to drain the battery much, much faster at a very accelerated rate. It's going to force them from battery to a power receptacle somewhere if they want to continue the attack. Here's one I call the wrong answer. This act of defense could definitely get you reported for malicious content. I rate it as high. So anybody in here have to recover a system after the hard drive is completely filled up and the system crashes? Anyone have to do that? I can't be the only old schooler it's happened to. Yeah, I see a few hands. Real pain in the rear. Maybe not so much now as it was back in the day before you had live CDs and, a million other ways. A lot of systems are virtual and so on. It used to be when we're dealing with hardware, you'd actually have to take the drive out of a system, sort of cable it off on a secondary system, boot it up, mount it as another drive, and clean it up before you could actually power it in and bring it up. Well, the interesting thing is I presented at OISF meeting a few months back, and actually when I was doing a demo, the site I was using for active defense was actually down and completely inaccessible, and I didn't know why until I got home later that night, looked at it. What happened was the web server's disk hard drive completely filled up. Guess what? The web services stopped running. The web server was no longer serving up the page. The page was effectively down. It was denial of service, and so that's the kind of problems this caused. So what 42.zip is, we give it an enticing name like employee salary history.xls.zip, but it's really just a renamed version of the infamous 42.zip. And a lot of you are probably familiar with this, but if you're not, it's approximately a 42 kilobyte compressed zip file, fully uncompressed and extracted. It's going to expand out upwards of 4.2 petabytes worth of data. And most data thieving cyber criminals, they're not going to have a hard drive that big. So you might wreck their ride a little bit. I'm not going to shed too many tears over it. So anyway, fun little active defense thing that you can use just to try to draw them in. And then finally, this last one I call Bobby Dropkick, and it's directly inspired by this XKCD comic that probably a lot of you have seen, but it's one of my favorites. It's titled Exploits of a Mom. And so the mom is answering the phone from the school, and on the other end, they're saying, "Hi, this is your son's school. We're having some computer trouble." Mom says, "Oh, dear, did he break something?" And the answer is, "Yeah, in a way." She says, and then they ask the question, "Did you really name your son Robert Drop Table Students?" And Mom says, "Oh, yes, little Bobby Tables, we call him." The school says, "Well, we've lost this year's student records. I hope you're happy." And Mom says, "And I hope you've learned to sanitize your database inputs." And that's the idea behind this. So the setup here is to stage a fake employee database dump file inside of an unreferenced folder. That is something we basically said keep out of on our robots text file. So I've got /org/department/human resources. If you're an enterprising malicious threat actor, you're going to want to spend time in that folder. So what we do is we give this database file an enticing name like Human Resource Information Systems Employee MySQL Database Backup.zip. If you compress it, you could uncompress it, but then you start having a little more impacts on your web server potentially if you don't have it compressed. This was a big file, by the way. This was a database file I found in MySQL's Git repository that they had as a sample employee database full of fictitious information. I pulled it right from their Git repository. It was a bunch of sort of small mini MySQL dump files. I imported the whole thing as one big, and then exported as one big file. But by the way, I put some of my own code here near the bottom, not the very bottom where the final comment codes are, but just one screen above that where somebody would have to scroll back all the way to the bottom and scroll back a little bit to find it. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure out a way to tell MySQL dump all of the databases. So the next best thing I could come up with was, what if I dump the internal database tables? Or databases, the internal databases to MySQL. So we dump MySQL sys, the performance schema, and the information schema. And what that effectively does is it completely breaks the MySQL server. And by the way, oftentimes the security is, so-and-so got breached, or they lost a bunch of data. Oh, they should have had backups. It's their own fault for not having backups. You'll hear that from attackers. You'll also hear a lot of defenders sort of parrot that. My thought is, well, let's find out how many times they actually eat their own dog food. So I actually put the information schema at the bottom because it's the one internal database that actually has read-only content. And by the way, this drop database process will fail when it hits the read-only content there. So I want to make sure I get rid of all the other ones first, get as far as I can into information schema disappearing before it actually stops. And at this point, if they don't have good backups, particularly a threat actor, everything that they've managed to pillage for who knows how long, if they don't have that stuff backed up, yeah, it's pretty much gone because their MySQL instance is pretty well hosed at that point. And if you thought recovering from a full hard drive was a hassle, yeah, this is a bad day. Real bad day. So I'm the only one who talks about active defense stuff. I mentioned John Strand. Black Hills Information Security has a distribution out there called ADHD, which is the Active Defense Harbinger distribution. It's an entire Linux distribution. It's even recently been updated, so it's very well maintained, where they have some other techniques. They do some things a little bit differently. So a lot of what they do, there was a mention of honeypots and having sort of canary tokens that phone home and so forth. That's a big focus of this. It's very much built around attribution to figure out who's stealing your stuff, where it ends up, because that's probably who really did it. I haven't taken it, but there is a SANSEC 550 class that's built all around ADHD. And I actually talked to somebody that took that class. They recommended it highly. They actually said a lot of the stuff I've shown here sort of blends in well with the things they've done there. So a little bit different focus, but very good project. It's well documented, by the way, so it's very easy to implement and deploy. So some criticisms from this talk. Yeah, I've received a few. Actually, one of my good friends sitting in the audience saw I had a different sort of payload before, if you will, for the defense that became Reflector of Madness. Didn't like the fact that the username and password was a little too easy to crack. It was really had a taunting message in it before, and I thought, well, I think there's merit to sort of getting the attacker's hopes up a little bit, only to crush their dreams in a moment. That's just my own personal philosophy. So I actually decided to come up with the seamless iframe pointing back to their own web server. But you're in control, so you can make that username and password as easy or as hard to crack as you like. It's entirely at your own discretion. Some people might say, well, this would make a legitimate penetration test more difficult. So having good documentation in advance. Hopefully you have a white box or gray box engagement where it's not just the pen tester coming in cold. You can actually explain sort of what lives in these places. Simply having the robots text file and saying all the stuff that's designated with these sort of comment codes, are things that you should be wary of because they could get you into trouble. Being able to sort of explain these things ahead of time should basically alleviate those concerns. And also the sitemap, explain what's in there. And like, here's the stuff we're really concerned about, the stuff in the sitemap XML. Some of the other stuff may look a little funny. So, for example, the fake WordPress login page, one of my good penetration tester friends said, that might actually be vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Normally that would be a big concern and something I would absolutely have fixed before it even went live. But in this case, who's accessing that site? It's only threat actors and other threat actors. So I have a very warped sense of humor in my mind. I kind of picture threat actor group A doing cross-site scripting stuff against this page, this login page that goes nowhere. Meanwhile, malicious threat group B finds it, and they start trying to do cross-site. At this point, both groups are literally hacking themselves. And I take great joy in that little thought that plays in my mind of what could potentially happen there. It's glee right there. And so other concerns is, oh man, we're not going to implement this. It might really tick off some skilled attackers and vindictive type people. So malicious threat actors today are largely undeterred. They don't fear retaliation. They don't fear retribution. So they're just going to keep hacking this stuff. They don't care if they aren't going to be retaliated against, if they're not going to suffer any consequences. Why would they stop? And I'm not suggesting that you stop trying to improve your defenses, but, maybe if we can, cause them to do harm to themselves, then maybe rethink their life choices a little bit. But we know why they keep compromising vulnerable systems. And finally, I take a little solace in the fact of knowing that Brian Krebs is alive and well today, and it's a testament to not living in fear of what might happen. And those who aren't familiar with Brian Krebs, he runs KrebsOnSecurity.com, a very great security blog. He's also exposed a lot of Eastern European and Russian and a lot of people that are doing spamming and phishing and so forth, and actually, basically committing fraud of all kinds, crimes of all kinds, and basically throwing all their information out there for the world to see and making it very easy for law enforcement to track them down. And he's had death threats and all sorts of other things done to him. The man's still alive and well today. I know I was just talking to him at the Central Ohio InfoSec Summit a couple months ago. So I'm pretty sure he's much higher on the hit list than I am. So as long as he's still alive, I feel like, who cares about me? And so also, if you're still not convinced in this active defense stuff, you don't have to do it. I'm just here to give you guys an educational InfoSec talk. If you're not comfortable with it, there's nothing that says you have to do this stuff. Just trying to take a different approach and understand there's not a lot of people out there doing this stuff yet. So, honeypots sort of had a hard sell. They're getting, more accepted as standard security practices. And so with that, I've got a little bit of time here just to do a couple quick demos. Let me go ahead and pull this up here. So let me pull up HTOP. And so at the very top here, in the very upper top, if you can see the bars at the top, that's basically the CPU. It's running reasonably low right now. So let me go ahead and pull up the web browser. On my mouse. So this is the pie to the face demo. As I say, I don't understand. Nothing ever goes wrong with live demos. Hopefully it's coming up here soon. It is actually running in the background. So here you see the CPU, which was very low before. Now you see the top 4 bars up there. Big jump in CPU cycles just by running the web page here. And then if I go back to that, oops, that isn't the right page. Did I lose it? Okay, well, where in the world? I did? I swear I don't know what happened to it. It was on the screen. Alright. Usually that comes up. I'm not sure why. Alright, there it is. Okay. You can see what it does to system performance, by the way. This is actually a good illustration of sort of how effective this can be. So if I close it, you'll notice the CPU, boom, drops way back down. And that's what cryptojacking does to individuals, is it really sort of wastes their CPU cycles and so forth. So that's pie to the face. me go ahead and here's our WordPress login page. It's just like any other WordPress login page. Doesn't matter what the heck I type in here. It's just going to cycle it back, reprompt. So somebody could try to brute force this thing all day. Of course, you guys now know the secret. There is no username and password combo that's actually going to crack that. It's just going to sit there and spin its wheels all day long and basically waste their time. Let's see here. Yo. Yeah, in fact, that's what I mentioned when I talked about it, and being able to, if you're logging that information, you can put together your own username password lists. Yeah, absolutely. You can use it to harvest credentials and so forth and try to understand what the bad guys are using against you. Probably the closer this thing looks to what your organization actually uses, sort of might give you a clue as to whether or not somebody's really targeting you, or if you're just getting sprayed from some random brute forcer that's just throwing kitchen sink attacks at anything and everything. So those are a couple of the techniques. Yeah, you could absolutely put in a delay. That's actually a very good suggestion. Thanks, Paul. So the idea is that make it look like it's working a little harder to process credentials, so it further sort of sells the authenticity of it. So definitely a good suggestion. Thank you. Let's see here. I want to demo the others. So how am I doing on time? All right. So the other thing that we can do is a quick Zap demo. So some of you might be wondering, well, you know, this stuff sounds interesting and it's cool and all, but how do I really know that the bad guys are going to find this stuff and actually see it to try to exploit it? I got to kill that web browser, man. Darn you, active defenses! I'm thwarting myself. It's pretty good when you denial service yourself. That's, you know, it's pretty awesome, right? So what I'm doing is I'm pulling up right now a program called Zap. It's the OWASP Z-Attack proxy, a very cool tool for doing some web app penetration testing. So I'm going to tell it that I'm not going to maintain this session. So if you're wondering, you know, how do you know that the bad guys are really going to find this active defense content? So there's a couple things. One is I know wget command line options to ignore the robot's text file. The other is I know that tools like OWASP Zap exist and plenty of others, but this one's a quick and easy one to demo. I know it's a little bit of an eye chart here, but basically the first line, it's using the root of the website as a seed to understand where the other stuff is. Not only is it not ignoring the robot's text file and following the rules that we've told it, it's actually using that information as seed to say, hey, they want us to stay out of here. There must be juicy stuff in there that we want to go after. And then the third line, it's actually using the sitemap XML file, which we referenced in the robot's text, to understand, hey, here's where good content exists. So it's really kind of using these things that are legitimate almost against us. And it's very simple. So what it's done is it's crawled the web site, and it's very simple. If I want to just export this out to a file, and it's going to tell me export successful. Let me go ahead and pop this up real quick so you guys can see it. Oh, what I'm going to do is open this up in a spreadsheet application just because it makes it very easy to view. So I'm going to pop it up here in LibreOffice Calc. And so what I've done is I've exported a list of the URLs. And as you look through here, you can start to understand it's really crawling this thing. It's finding all of these folders that we said, hey, just ignore the stuff that's in here. Here's the README files that we put in there just with our little disclaimer. So try to keep people from coming back on us. As we start looking in here, boom, here's the bookmarks HTML file that is pi to the face. So yeah, it finds that. It's finding our salary history, basically our renamed 42.zip file with an enticing file name. It finds that. So at this point, it's very easy. It's even showing us the usernames that they could spend time trying to crack that don't actually do anything. The door ID. Here's our fake headshots that exist. Finding all this information. It'll also, I kind of slip through it a list quickly, but here's the door badge ID. I must have scrolled by it, but it does find the database backup file that will basically dump all their databases. It's in there if I had time to go through and find it, but want to try to keep us on schedule here as much as possible. But that's really what I had. So any other questions? Yes?
I noticed that robot's text file was used by the OAuth to actually ignore the fact of not using it and actually used it to map the website space.
Absolutely.
Would it be beneficial to put a fake website space in a completely fake directory and have that robot's text file just reference that fake area?
You could definitely do that. That's definitely sort of another good way to sort of do it. That's a good thought. So the suggestion was, hey, why not have a fake area of the site that's, doesn't really exist, reference that in your robot's text file so that you send malicious threat actors to this entirely made up space out and basically waste their time. Definitely a good suggestion. I like that one. Yes?
About setting a disallowed directory in the robots.txt for blacklisting IPs when browsed to right off the bat, just drop it out the connection.
Yeah, normally I think that's a good practice if you're sort of taking a more traditional defensive approach. In my case, again, I kind of want people to waste their time. That's why I'm specifically not banning them. But if you weren't comfortable doing active defense content, that's a great suggestion. Why not have something in your robots text file that basically collects IPs and automatically blacklists it as whoever's in here has no good intentions. So with that, I'm out of time.